Isolated in the Alaskan Wilderness is Denali, the tallest peak in North America, towering more than 20,000 feet above sea level. Since its first successful summit in 1913 by a party led by Hudson Stuck and Harry Carstens, thousands of people have attempted to reach its peak, but its relatively low death rate has lulled potential climbers into a false sense of security about Denali's true survivability. Winds can reach speeds of 160 kilometers per hour. Temperatures have been recorded as low as -75.5 degrees Fahrenheit. Sunny, clear-skied mornings can transform into a blizzard by afternoon, forcing climbers to take refuge in their tent. Sections of the climb have a 1,000-foot drop either side. One wrong step can be fatal. And you're even more isolated than you are on mountains like Everest. There are no sherpas, there are no porters, there are no warm huts. You are responsible for carrying all of your equipment needed to survive. That's why over 120 people who once aimed to reach the summit of Denali never made it back down, and nearly half of their bodies still lie on the mountain. Whilst there's controversy surrounding its name, throughout this video I'm going to refer to it as Denali, as that's its native name, and it literally translates to the high one, and high it is. To truly understand the dangers of Denali, we need to discuss its remote location, its extreme height, the unpredictable weather, the climb itself, and finally, the potential worrying future of Denali. Denali is situated in the Alaska Range, which is the highest mountain range in North America. It's the centerpiece of the Denali National Park, which spans 2.4 million hectares. Most expeditions begin at Talkeetna, the last point of civilization. Talkeetna is about a 2-hour drive from Anchorage, the largest city in Alaska. It has a population of about 1,000 people, and most of its economy is made up from people visiting to hike, camp, fish, or to use as a base for an expedition to Denali. Talkeetna is only a census-designated place, meaning it's a concentrated area of population defined purely for statistical reasons. Essentially, it governs itself, and the best way to illustrate this is the fact its mayor from 1997 to 2017 was literally a cat called Stubbs. The reason people use Talkeetna as a base is due to its airport. It's home to several air taxi companies which ferry climbers to the mountain, weather permitting of course. The flight takes roughly 45 minutes and usually takes climbers to the southeast fork of the Kahiltna Glacier at an elevation of about 7,200 feet. The flight is incredibly scenic with views of massive glaciers and deep valleys below. However, once you are here, this is where Denali's danger becomes apparent. You are now on your own. There are no sherpas or porters, you carry your own gear. There's no road access, no nearby villages, no satellite supported base camp logistics like Everest. Everything from food to fuel to emergency gear must be brought by you and your team. This makes the climb a logistical challenge on top of the technical challenge of the climb itself, which we'll come back to later in this video. Denali's location does have one benefit though. Due to it being in the northern hemisphere and Earth's 23.5 degrees axial tilt, it has massively extended daylight hours. For example, on the 15th of June, which would be a pretty standard time of the year to attempt to summit Denali, the sun sets at midnight and rises at 3:40 AM. This reduces the need to carry out parts of the climb in darkness, which you have to on mountains like Everest. If you do find yourself needing a rescue on Denali, helicopters will likely be your saviour. Whilst the conditions need to be right, remarkably, a man was saved in 2024 at an elevation of 19,500 feet. They put the man in an open air basket and dropped him off at 7,800 feet, where medics were waiting. He was then flown back to Talkeetna, where he was seen by doctors. A rescue at this height is the exception and not the rule. This man was in a life-threatening situation and wouldn't have survived without this risky high-altitude rescue. But what was killing him? Denali's altitude. Denali stands above any other peak in North America with a height of 6,190 metres, which is 20,310 feet. If you've seen any of my other mountain videos, you'll know that above 8,000 metres you enter the death zone, which Denali doesn't reach, but that doesn't mean its altitude isn't deadly. Denali is situated at a higher latitude than its Himalayan counterparts. This cooler air means less barometric pressure, making the air feel thinner than it would at the same altitude elsewhere. For example, the 20,310 foot summit actually feels like you're at 23,000 feet. I mentioned earlier that there are no porters or sherpas on Denali. You're responsible for carrying your own equipment, which puts a greater toll on your body. When you arrive, you'll have roughly 100 pounds or 45 kilograms of extra weight split between your backpack and sled. Then in between camps on a daily basis, this may come down to about 60 pounds or 27 kilograms. But this extra weight, combined with the altitude, can be a deadly combination. Without proper acclimatization, climbers can quite easily experience altitude mountain sickness, or AMS, which can lead to feeling sick and vomiting. But it's HACE and HAPE which are the ones to worry about. Going back to that story about the climber being rescued at 19,500 feet, the man was struggling with coordination, was extremely cold, and then he collapsed. His team were concerned his brain was beginning to swell due to high altitude cerebral edema, HACE. They administered dexamethasone to try and stabilise him. They tried to contact the National Park Service from a satellite communications device, but were unable to get a connection, so they had to walk about 15 minutes to finally get in touch with them. Originally, they agreed on a rescue at sunrise, but when going back to the tent, the man was struggling to breathe and they believed he was now suffering from high altitude pulmonary edema, HAPE. This is where your lungs begin to fill with fluid. It is described as feeling like you're drowning whilst laying down. They administered nifedipine to reduce the swelling. They quickly organised the immediate high-risk, high-altitude helicopter rescue. From the initial call to the pickup, it was under 4 hours. Without his team having the correct medication and the extremely fast rescue, it's unlikely that this man would have made it down from Denali alive. Evidently, Denali not being tall enough to enter the death zone does not make its altitude any less of a threat. Just quickly, if you're enjoying this video, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit the subscribe button and help me towards my goal of 100,000 subscribers. But anyway, it's not just Denali's altitude you have to worry about. Denali is considered one of the coldest mountains on Earth. It lies just 3 degrees south of the Arctic Circle, making it vulnerable to polar systems which bring extremely cold temperatures, even in the summer. The lowest temperature officially recorded was -75.5 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -59.7 degrees Celsius. This same weather station recorded the wind chill at a ridiculously cold -118.1 degrees Fahrenheit, which is -83.4 degrees Celsius. To put that into context, the lowest recorded temperature on Everest Peak was -42 degrees Fahrenheit, or -41 degrees Celsius. A pretty big difference. And it's not just the extreme colds which you have to combat when climbing Denali's unforgiving face. Wind speeds can exceed 100 miles per hour, which is 160 kilometers per hour. Imagine how tired your body is from all the physical exertion. Then the altitude is making you feel weaker, and to top it off, you can't get a good night's sleep due to the screaming winds battering your tent all night long. What makes the weather more deadly is the fact it can change very quickly. The jet stream can turn blue-skied mornings into a white-out blizzard by the afternoon. These storms can last for multiple days, forcing climbers to bunker down in their tent for a prolonged period of time. There's not a more stark example of this than the 1967 Mount McKinley disaster. 7 climbers were caught in a sudden blizzard during their descent. The storm is estimated to be the worst on the mountain in over 100 years. The accident is the deadliest to occur on Denali, as none of the 7 men survived. When these storms do hit, there is zero chance of a helicopter rescue, so you're truly on your own. So at this point in the video, the altitude, location and weather of Denali have showcased how deadly it can be. But whilst you're battling them, you have to actually climb the mountain. In terms of the distance you have to climb, from base camp to summit, Denali is up there with one of the biggest in the world. For example, the base camp at Denali is at an altitude of around 7,200 feet, and its summit is 20,310 feet, making the altitude change about 13,110 feet. Then, for Everest, base camp is at 17,598 feet, with the summit being at 29,031, making the altitude change about 11,433 feet, meaning there's a greater elevation change on Denali than Everest, despite being a smaller mountain. So with that in mind, the route I'm about to describe is the West Buttress route, which is considered the easiest, and I mean easiest in quotation marks. Approximately 50% of people who attempt to reach the summit will make it. So we're starting from the Kahiltna Glacier, which I talked about in the location segment. Teams generally spend 1 or 2 nights here organising their gear, carrying out training sessions and preparing sleds for glacier travel. From base camp, the route begins with a descent down Heartbreak Hill onto the main branch of the Kahiltna Glacier. The route then heads north along the glacier's broad, flat expanse. While the elevation gain to Camp 7.8k isn't extreme, at this point you're carrying a heaviest load in your backpack and sled, which makes it more demanding. Travel is typically done at night or early morning to avoid the intensity of the midday sun, and the snow is firmer due to the colder temperatures. Camp 1, or Camp 7.8k, sits at an altitude of 7,800 feet. Teams will often leave miscellaneous items and rubbish here to then pick up again on their descent. The push towards Camp 2, or Camp 11k, continues up the Kahiltna Glacier and up Ski Hill. Sleds become more challenging to manage on steeper sections, so some teams set up an intermediate camp, somewhere around 10,000 feet, to cache some of their equipment and to allow for acclimatization. Camp 11k sits at an altitude of 11,200 feet, and it sits at the bottom of Motorcycle Hill, in a small glacial base below ice slopes and some very large seracs. Typically, this is the point where climbers will swap snowshoes and ski poles for crampons and an ice axe. From here, the avalanche risk begins to increase. It's estimated that avalanches on Denali have taken the lives of over 45 people. In 2012, 5 Japanese climbers were swept into a crevasse by an avalanche whilst descending at around 11,800 feet. Only one of them made it back down alive. The route steepens on the push towards Camp 14k. It takes a little under 2 hours to reach the top of Motorcycle Hill, and after that there's another slope called Squirrel Hill. You have to constantly be aware of crevasses when navigating these sections. Then you reach Windy Corner, which is notorious for, well, you guessed it, high-speed winds. But not just that, it's also a high-risk area for rockfalls, so wearing a helmet is advised. Camp 14k, also known as Jennet Basin, is a great point to spend time acclimatizing, as it's high enough to gain tangible benefits, but not so high that your body starts to deteriorate. Climbers will typically spend multiple nights here, carrying up loads to the next section, resting and acclimatizing. Mountain rangers have a presence at this camp, meaning services such as medical assistance and weather forecasts are available. From Camp 14k, climbers face the head wall, a steep snow face with inclines of 40 to 50 degrees. This section is physically demanding due to the steepness, altitude and exposure to solar radiation. It marks a transition from glacier travel to ridge climbing. Again, it's advised here to wear a helmet due to potential rockfalls. From here is one of the most breathtaking sections of the climb, the ridge, with amazing views either side. The climbing itself isn't too difficult, but that sometimes lulls climbers into a false sense of security. One slip could result in a 1,000-foot drop. The ridge broadens and flattens out before reaching the final camp at 17,200 feet. High camp is situated in a small basin which offers limited shelter and is subject to extreme weather conditions. Wind speeds are often above 70 miles per hour and temperatures fall below -30 degrees Fahrenheit. Camps must be well protected and block walls must be carefully constructed to protect tents during storms. Because of this, time spent at high camp is minimised if possible. The push from high camp to the summit and back takes around 14 hours, and is usually the hardest day of the expedition. First, you must cross a demanding section of the glacier, known as the Autobahn. There are fixed pickets along this section of the route, and the climbing can be anything from deep winter snow to bulletproof blue ice. This is the stretch of the West Buttress that has seen the most accidents, so extreme caution is needed. After reaching the Denali Pass at 18,200 feet, climbers traverse across another long, fairly flat section called the football field, after which they ascend the last and final slope, Pig Hill. And then you've officially made it. 2 weeks of mountaineering and you're standing on the highest piece of land in all of North America. And this is what the views look like at 20,310 feet. However, you've now got the harder part of the expedition ahead. You have to do all of that again, but in reverse. But this time with less energy and motivation than you had before. And that's why over half the fatalities on Denali happen during descent. At this point in the video, you should have a pretty good understanding of why Denali is one of the most unforgiving mountains in the world. But it appears that some people underestimate quite how deadly it can be. In the first month of the 2021 climbing season, the National Park Rangers had more search and rescue calls than they've had in entire years previously. They said, "We have seen a disturbing amount of overconfidence paired with inexperience in the Alaska Range. Do not let the crowds on the West Buttress lull you into a false sense of security. You do not want to be the subject of the next Denali National Park news release." There seems to be a general sentiment of overconfidence and underestimation across all of mountaineering, as similar stories are coming from Everest. But to make matters worse on Denali, the search and rescue team is being halved in size. President Donald Trump signed a hiring freeze executive on January the 20th, 2025, which stopped the hiring of all federal civil employees. Like many other national park staff, 6 of the 12 search and rescue members at the Denali National Park are seasonal and are typically rehired for each climbing season. Of the 6 rangers with permanent positions, 2 are supervisors who need to stay around the office. This leaves only 4 rescuers for a mountain that may have over 500 climbers on its busiest days. Less support available with more inexperienced climbers on the mountain is a disaster waiting to happen. Survival on Denali is far from guaranteed. Thank you to my members on screen now who got to see this video early. And if you enjoyed this video, I've made a series of videos about other mountains which you can find in the playlist on screen now.